South China Morning Post, 28th of October 2022. Next week, Big Fool German Chancellor Olaf Scholz will travel to China to promote his products. Germany depends heavily on exports. She can no longer access her primary energy and export market, Russia. China is left behind. China, meanwhile, is presently experiencing deflation. India is a better option for Germany to consider. On November 4, at the invitation of Chinese Premier Li Keqiang, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz will travel to China, the Chinese government announced on Friday. The Chancellor announced the trip last week, although he did not provide a date. Before traveling to Bali for the Group of 20 meeting in the middle of November, Scholz will stop in Vietnam and Singapore with a delegation of critical German businesses. Scholz will be the first Western European leader to visit China since the coronavirus pandemic. It will be his first encounter with Chinese President Xi Jinping since taking the helm of the ruling coalition last year. According to a July report by the South China Morning Post, Scholz and other politicians from Western Europe received invitations from Beijing to meet Xi. Only the Germans, though, were desperate enough to go against the grain. According to Bloomberg, the business delegation would include representatives from Adidas, Deutsche Bank, Siemens, BioNTech, a maker of vaccines, Volkswagen, and BMW, as well as chemical and pharmaceutical behemoths BASF and Wacker Chemie. Beijing may be willing to license the vaccines if BioNTech, the maker of an mRNA COVID-19 vaccine that has not yet received Chinese approval, is present. However, Beijing has placed its reputation on the ineffective Sinotech vaccinations, making it difficult for China to manage the virus that escaped from its Wuhan laboratory without resorting to lockdowns. After raising concerns about reports of forced labor in western China's Xinjiang region, Adidas last year found itself the target of a consumer boycott in the second-largest economy in the world. According to French media, President Emmanuel Macron reportedly proposed a combined trip to Beijing, but Scholz rejected the idea. The French president is now anticipated to visit China in the first half of 2019. Scholz stated that we are liberal democracies and that we have no illusions about who we are dealing with when it comes to China during the European Council conference last week in Brussels. There had been no referendum on deglobalization or to pull out of China, he continued, among the 27 nations that make up the European Union. The trip has annoyed some European allies and the ruling coalition. Scholz has come under fire from diplomats and government representatives for traveling with a group of businessmen, saying that this demonstrates that Germany has not learned its lesson since the invasion of Ukraine exposed its reliance on Russian gas. At home, Scholz's Social Democratic Party's junior coalition partners, the Greens and Free Democrats, FDP, support a more aggressive stance toward China. The German government authorized the sale of a 24.9% stake in a terminal at Hamburg port, the busiest in the nation, to the Chinese state-owned shipping company COSCO earlier this week, despite claims from officials that the sale would make Germany more susceptible to blackmail and economic coercion from China. The Greens and FDP opposed permitting COSCO to acquire any ownership interest in the terminal, which the business had initially planned to do by purchasing 35%. However, COSCO's acquisition was scaled back as a compromise, so it would not have voting privileges. The existence of a threat to public order and safety, according to Germany's economic ministry, which is overseen by Greens co-leader Robert Habeck, is the cause for the partial prohibition. Despite resistance from 6 ministries and the European Commission, which had forewarned the threats to national security posed by having a crucial EU port partially owned by a Chinese state business, the Chancellor supported the deal. COSCO and other Chinese shipping firms have steadily increased their ownership shares in numerous European ports, notably Antwerp, Duisburg, Rotterdam, Zeebrugge, and Athens. According to the German business journal Handelsblatt on Thursday, Scholz also wants to push through the acquisition of the chip manufacturing division of German firm Elmos by rival Silex, which China owns. Chinese corporation Sai Microelectronics is the owner of the Swedish company Silex. The Economy Ministry is examining the deal, but according to a story in Handelsblatt, German security services had sent a warning. Politicians from the opposition have criticized the numerous China-related developments. Conservative member of the Bundestag's Foreign Affairs Committee Norbert Röttgen stated, "The coalition has pledged a strategic realignment of China policy." But given that they failed to consider China's transition from an authoritarian to a dictatorship, what we currently observe is not an improvement but rather a deterioration in German China policy. As usual, the federal chancellor will visit Beijing next week with a sizable business group, acting as if nothing has changed in China. Both internally and publicly, that is the wrong signal.